Thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there for tuning into what we're calling a teaser episode for the new true crime podcast called True Crime Monkey. In the new True Crime Monkey podcast, we'll be delving into several true crime cases, many of which still remain unsolved to this day. I'm your host, Jeff, and what I'm hoping will set the True Crime Monkey podcast apart from many of the other podcasts out there is the inclusion of actual audio and video from those involved in the cases. As many of you true crime aficionados know, there's a lot of rumors out there on the internet, Facebook, Reddit, that just simply aren't true and end up wasting a lot of valuable time that could be spent doing research on the particular cases. So let's get right to the teaser episode. This will be from the first case that will be featured on the True Crime Monkey podcast, and actually will end up being a series as we plan to do numerous episodes on this case. This case is the case of the missing nursing student in New Hampshire named Maura Murray, who disappeared in 2004. While this teaser episode may be more geared to those already familiar with the case, when we launched the new True Crime Monkey podcast in July 2019, we will include an introduction to the case for those who may have never heard of the case, or just may want to refamiliarize themselves with the case itself. What you're about to hear is a portion of an interview between myself and John Smith. Many of you already know John Smith, but for those who don't, John is a former private investigator and a local to the area who's been looking at and investigating the case for the past 15 years. For some, John may be considered a controversial figure in the case, but for me personally, I believe him to be the foremost authority on facts associated with the Maura Murray case. And in fact, John will be my co-host on many, many episodes in the Maura Murray series. So sit back, enjoy, and I hope you like this portion of what will be the new True Crime Monkey podcast. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at True Crime Monkey. One of the things we talked about was the timeline. And you and I have spoken at length about the timeline and what we think happened. And then we were presented with the Maggie and Art version, which they changed from their original version. So let's talk a little bit about how their version just can't be possible and what we really think happened. So I'm going to give it to you and we'll go from there, starting with maybe Faith Westman's call and everything that transpired at the Weather Barn Corner.
Yeah. Well, I think, seeing you went there with the Oxygen documentary and Maggie and Art's timeline, I think some of the first words that came out of Maggie's mouth on the Oxygen documentary were, "This is a last-ditch attempt to solve this case." And, well, I don't think it was a last-ditch attempt to solve the case. I don't really want to go into it too deep, but it was definitely an attempt to steer the narrative.
Yeah, I started to say I'm not so sure it was to solve as to steer.
Right. And, another thing that she said was, all that she's here for is she's looking for the truth. Well, we're here to talk about the truth as it faces us and stares us right in the face. And you can look it right in the eye. As it originally came out 15 years ago, we're not gonna take and look at it from their view 13 years later and turn everything upside down and make it fit to their agenda, whatever that might be. We have to look at this as it is in the dispatch logs. We have to look at it as the way that it's written and the way that it's told way back in the beginning, okay? And that is, even though it doesn't make any sense, it is what makes the most sense, all right? Because their new timeline does not make sense. It does not fit. So, I think the first thing that we have to look at is, we know that the first call that we have in the records was at 7:27 by Faith Westman. And, there's a lot of talk about, another scanner call that was overheard. And they think that was a little bit earlier. I'm going to go into that a little bit here. And, but the first thing that we need to know is that when Faith Westman first called and spoke to dispatch, she said there was a car off the road and that there was a man in the vehicle smoking a cigarette. Right. Okay. And that is the basic complete narrative.
And that's
Faith
on the
Westman's
record at
911.
7:27 p.m.
7:27 p.m. So, that is her she was on the phone for 1 minute and 18 seconds. And we know that now. We never knew that before until the Oxygen documentary. And now we know that because these guys told us that. So we know that Faith Westman was on the phone for that long. So let's say 7:27, minute and 18 seconds. We'll give them to 7:29. All right. So apparently Faith Westman hung up the phone. And this is in a couple of newspaper reports, as well as somebody else. I believe his name was Joe Anderson from the Not Without Peril blog post, come up and spoke with Faith and Tim. And in doing so, she said that she hung up with 911 when the police arrived on scene. Okay, that's our first big red flag. Okay, if this is true, then what that means is that if Faith Westman hung up the phone at 7:29 and dispatch had toned out Cecil Smith at 7:29, almost 7:30, I believe it was, how did Cecil Smith arrive on scene, or how did the police vehicle arrive on scene within 30 seconds?
Yeah, not possible. Even if Cecil was at his own home on Bunker Road, or his father's home, he couldn't have arrived at that time. But pretty much what we're hearing is he was at the police station, which we know takes a good 12 to 16 minutes to arrive at the Weather Barn corner.
That is correct. So I think what we have to look at here is that we have to face the fact that, and we're gonna believe Tim and Faith Westman. Okay, they are our closest witnesses to the scene. They are the first 911 callers, and we have to believe what they say because we're going by the narrative. We're going by what we were told in the documentary, and we're going by what we've heard from people that have talked to them personally. So if indeed she got off the phone with them when the cruiser pulled up, this puts this at about 7:30 p.m. All right.
I noticed you said cruiser. But
what's that?
I noticed you said cruiser, so that's a whole nother aspect we'll get into.
Okay, and cruiser, yeah, I usually say cruiser as well myself. I will have to say that, and that's because that's what she said. She said when the police showed up. I don't know if she said cruiser, but I think she said when the police showed up. And cruiser, SUV. We do know that what witness A saw when she went by is 001. SUV 001 said Haverhill Police on the side. It was nose to nose with the Saturn, and we know that's the truth. So the part that does not fit, again, is if we go by Karen McNamara's time frame, okay, which they have said she's a credible witness, her time frame lines up. Well, it puts her at the accident scene at approximately 7:33, I believe is the time.
Yeah, 7:33 to 7:35.
So if we put her there at that time, she witnesses the SUV 001 nose to nose. More than likely, this is the same cruiser that was seen by and reported by Faith Westman. I mean, that's the only thing that makes any sense. All right?
Right.
Now, what doesn't make any sense, again, is that how that cruiser could be there in such a short time if the cruiser was responding from the police department, which you said is a, 10 to 15, 12 to 16 minute trip, whatever it might be. So you have to take that into account. And if we go by Maggie and Art's new timeline, which would be 7:37 that they say that Cecil Smith arrived in the SUV, then that still does not fit, because it does not fit with the fact that Faith Westman said that she hung up when the police arrived. So it's not fitting into their timeline. And then the next thing that we have is we have in the narrative from Faith Westman to 911, she states that there's a car off the road in the ditch, in the westbound ditch facing westbound. I can see a man in the vehicle smoking a cigarette. All right. That is the complete narrative that we know. that was said in that 1 minute and 18 seconds. And one thing that we do not hear in that is a school bus. Okay? So if we don't have Faith Westman telling us that there was a school bus that came across the scene when she was on the phone, then we have to determine that either the school bus came by before Faith Westman ever made the phone call to 911 or after. Okay? Now, if it was after the 911 call, it is more than likely that Atwood would have seen the cruiser. Karen McNamara would have seen the bus driver, and none of that has been told to us by anyone.
Right, so it only makes sense that Butch would have been there before.
That's what makes complete sense to me, and not in the narrative, but in things that Faith has said later. Faith said the bus driver came along after he left. There was still a person at the vehicle. There was activity at the vehicle, lights going off and on, and the flurry of activity around the trunk. Now, again, none of this stuff is in the Grafton County Sheriff's Department dispatch. None of that's in her 1 minute and 18 seconds. So she's not telling this to the police. This is just stuff that we hear after. Okay? So I can't believe that the only thing that was said to dispatch in 1 minute and 18 seconds was that very short description that we have. You know, I mean, that's bizarre.
Yeah, do you think we're missing something from the logs? For example, we know that at least 3 versions of the logs were presented. One to Fred, right, and then 2 others that showed up after that fact.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is what you've got. I'm going to read it right now. Advise of a vehicle in the ditch right on the sharp turn after the weathered barn. Unknown if any PI, but can see a man in the vehicle smoking a cigarette. Was eastbound Route 112, but ended up in the westbound ditch facing westbound. I read that in about 25 seconds. Okay, and some of these things might take longer. Maybe they didn't put the whole narrative out. But you would think important things like a bus, a 40-foot bus parking in front of the vehicle and blocking it would have been something that would have been spoken about.
Yeah, so, you think she would have said, I mean, view was obstructed for a while, or then I saw a bus come up, or I saw a bus leaving, but no mention of a bus was ever made by Faith.
Right. So, you know, when you look at that, and like I said, now I want to go back to what I believe to be the real timeline, and the SUV signing off, Cecil Smith signing off when he did sign off at 7:46 p.m., which is the official narrative. I believe that's the truth. I believe, of course, that they changed that by 10 or 11 minutes to make their timeline fit better. But in doing so, they didn't realize what they were actually doing. They were making their time frame of what went down even smaller.
Right.
And the amount of people that would have been looking at it and what was said and who should have been seen in those, 3 to 4 minutes is basically what it is.
Right. And I've mentioned this for many months. I have never seen a situation where a policeman, whomever, shows up at the scene. The very first thing that you do if you get out of your car is you radio back to say, I'm out of the car. It's a safety issue. Mm-hmm. It's protocol. And if that would have happened at 7:46, then that would be exactly what it should be, because at 7:46, noting when he was toned out would be the time it would take to arrive there from, say, the police department. It all makes sense. There's no reason to try to steer the narrative back another 10 minutes. It just doesn't fit.
It just doesn't fit, and like I say, it worked against them in the long run, because now they put themselves in more of a bind, even not realizing it. They opened up the can of worms on this. Now, what I want to get into on this is my whole feeling is that, so we have this supposed and I have to call it supposed because it has never been confirmed, but I heard from two different people, locals, that they heard. I originally heard it from one person, and then I did hear it from another person that they heard some weird scanner calls that night. But the one was from the lady in Wells River, Reigate, Vermont, who said that she was cooking dinner in the kitchen. She overheard the scanner call, and it was a car slid off the road on Swiftwater Road um, into a ditch, um, and that basically she heard them say, "Turn back the fire department and the EMS," because the driver had left in a private vehicle. Now, where I'm going to go with this is I'm going to go to what makes the most sense is that when Faith Westman hung up that phone at 7:29 and that cop showed up on scene, not signing off, because whoever that first cop was in the SUV was nefarious. Something was going on because he passed Witness A 2 times on Swiftwater Road and at the end of Goose Lane and Route 112 before the call was even made to 911. So when you put all that together, what makes the most sense is that that vehicle, that SUV that was parked nose to nose to that Saturn, is the one that said that called back fire department and EMS.
And you think they called them back due to the prior accident, correct?
Well, I think that now I believe that everything happened right there. I believe that everything happened right there. Whether the car was damaged or not, that's another whole story. That's something else that I believe, and that has to do with the pictures never being seen. If there were 7 pictures taken, where are they? I still question if there was any damage to the Saturn at all that night, or if it had just spun out. But what makes that fit is that so that first cop, whoever that was driving that cruiser, decided he didn't want the fire department and EMS there. He's going to deal with himself. Okay, but that's the thing that's not in the log, but we know that it was overheard. But you still got Cecil Smith responding from the police department. I mean, he's the one who gets the call. And he's responding. So the only thing that SUV that passed Karen McNamara could have been doing was going to something that he already knew about somehow. He had already stopped the Saturn previously, and the Saturn drove away from him. But none of it fits into their scenario of it working out with their timeline. None of it does. And then the whole thing with Cecil, if he shows up at 7:46, and then we've got John Monahan showing up. John Monahan says that Cecil was in the Crown Victoria. That's the stuff that all makes this fit together really well. And, for all these years, you've got all these police interviews that they finally get. And, John Monahan comes on and says, well, this is the first time I've ever been able to tell my story. When I got that's not what I saw, were his words. What does that mean? We know that he said that he didn't go east that night. He went back to the west. There's just all the stuff that fits right around that. And him having Cecil in the Crown Victoria, and then Cecil lying, in my mind, lying on the Oxygen show about being in the SUV. I mean, you could tell he was lying, You could tell by the way he stated it that he was lying. I mean, and the reason that would have been was because it would have been like February, it's February like this.
Right, and even Maggie picked up on some of the things that he added comments to questions that weren't asked.
Right, and I think one of the biggest ones is we're talking about the timeline and bus driver and all that. You've got that whole thing, about her talking about Butch Atwood and him saying, "Well, I never really knew him before that."
Yeah, that was a question that no one ever prompted him to ask.
Right, and then apparently, John Monahan, what Cecil Smith said to John Monahan, he said that, "Oh yeah, Butch is out looking for him." So you never really knew him before that, but you're calling him Butch. He referred to him as Butch, not as Mr. Atwood or the school bus driver. So, there's all those things. And then, he says, responding to a vehicle into a tree. Well, we know that that's not the truth. There is nothing in the log that says, responding to a car into a tree. That's not what it says. It says a car in a ditch. Okay. And then 6 days later, okay, and I still can't figure this fucking thing out. But why 6 days later? This man, Cecil Smith, is Army intelligence, very high IQ, speaks 4 different languages, has to be a pretty smart man. Okay? But 6 days later, he's filling out an accident report, and he's putting in it that vehicle hit a tree. And that there was tire marks up to the tree, and the vehicle hit a tree. I mean, it's obvious it didn't. He had to have known that. He had to have known somebody was going to question that. I mean, because it's not obvious. I mean, it's not consistent. The damage is not consistent.
Yeah, I think maybe since they thought it was such a small town and it was a isolated, per se, incident, maybe they thought it could be just covered over and forgotten about.
Well, and I think that's probably exactly what they were thinking, that don't worry about it. What's the big deal? Nobody's going to question us. But I don't think they realized what was going to be coming down the road for all these years. And another one, I mean, you've got the whole thing with the rag in the tailpipe. Now, we know that Fred Murray has said that he told Moore to do that. Okay, that's fine with me. If he had said that, and that's what she was trying behind the vehicle that night, if that was her at the Saturn, okay, all well and good. I accept that. What I don't accept is the fact that the Saturn was put on a tow truck. It was towed to Lavoie's personal garage, put inside his personal garage, and kept there until Fred Murray saw the vehicle on Friday the 13th. Well, when Fred saw the vehicle, they told him, he had to retrieve the spare key, and when he went to start it, they said, "You're probably going to have to take that rag out of the tailpipe if you're going to want to start the vehicle." Well, that's another big red flag to me, because, first of all, when they went to the Westmans that night and asked him, "Where's the girl? There's a rag stuffed in her tailpipe." That's bizarre. You're not going to say that to those people in there, because you don't know maybe you know who those people are, but you don't know if they've had anything to do with this.
Yeah,
you don't want to give them any information at all.
From a law enforcement perspective, that would have been not pertinent to the case to knock on someone's door to ask them if they've seen someone. Oh, and right. By the way, she also had a rag in her tailpipe and a backpack in the back seat, and they don't mention any of that.
Exactly. And then, so now so they're treating this as weird on that night, but they don't take it out and treat it as evidence. It's still in the exhaust pipe on Friday. They let Fred Murray take it out of the exhaust pipe, and it's still not being, it was never treated as evidence. And it should have been. And that is something that I find just another bizarre thing in this case. And it takes me to the fact that why is the rag is put out in the BOL the next day at 12 something, 12:20 I believe it is. They put out the next BOL and they said victim of a crash, rag found stuffed in the tailpipe. I mean, that's just another bizarre thing. Why are you putting that out onto the airwaves?
Yeah, BOL is height, weight, appearance, where they might have been, just the basic facts.
Yeah.
The rag has no pertinence to anything as far as looking for someone.
Right. And then you look at the accident report, no mention of the rag at all. It's bizarreness beyond bizarreness, because they just don't have all their ducks in a row. They just were not thinking when they decided to make up these, fabricate these things, because, it would have been so easy. I mean, what's the big deal if they said, we don't know what happened? The car's come around the corner, spun out, we don't know what it hit. I mean, that would have been the easy route out.
Yeah, there was a girl there and she disappeared and we don't know what happened.
Right. I mean, did she run into the back of another vehicle and that vehicle drove off and we don't have a clue? That's what I would have said.
Yep. You alluded to some time frame from the time of the accident until Cecil filling out his report 6 days later. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the 4 days that a car spent at Mike Lavoie's personal garage. Did he happen to own, at least now he does, he owns some storage buildings right across from his shop. Did he own those at the time? Do you know?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, right across from his actual automotive shop, there are a couple small storage garages there. He did own them at the time.
And I know again, he does use that lot now to store cars sometimes, the one across the street. So it's odd that he would stick it in his personal garage. It just smacks to me of someone wanting to hide something.
Well, yeah, I mean, it might not, just because, okay, he didn't want to drive down to his garage and whatever, but for, if he drove it to his personal garage and drove the whole vehicle, the whole tow truck inside with the vehicle on it, I wouldn't be as much, going crazy over this.
Right, I agree. Park your truck with the car still on it.
Yeah, for him to unload that off that and push it backwards into his garage is, it's just another thing. It's just another thing that it's weird. And so then you have to add in, what we're going to add in is we're going to add in the fact that, he was not the tow truck driver that was supposed to be called. Okay, we know that it was supposed to be Dick McKean from Northland Towing. Now, and that's another whole thing. How did he get the call? Why did he get the call instead of McKean? I mean, that's something that dispatch should be able to answer. I don't think we'll ever get that answer.
And Dick McKean owns the actual barn where the actual Haverhill police impound is then, or was then, and is today. So, yeah,
right.
No reason it would have went to Lavoie's.
Right. The only thing that I can think of is in 2004, okay, if we believe Butch Atwood, and if we believe that the driver told Butch Atwood, no, don't call the police, I already called AAA. What if, and I don't know how or where she would have called AAA from, but what if she did, wasn't on her cell phone, so we don't think that it was from there. But what if she did call AAA? And what if the AAA garage that was called was Mike Lavoie's? Because Lavoie's Auto was a AAA. And it is the closest AAA to the city. That would
be a great question for Mike Lavoie to ask him, who did he receive the phone call from?
I think that that's something that if we can talk to him, if he will talk to us, I'd like to know who toned you out to go to that call? Did you hear it from? Does dispatch call you? Did the state police call you? You know, where did it come from?
And from what I understand, his wife actually took the call because he was asleep on the couch, mind you, at 7:30 on a Monday night. But
Mm-hmm.
his wife actually took the call and got his attention that he had a call.
Right. See, and again, you know, you look at his interview again on the Oxygen documentary. You know, I read people pretty well. I would have called that a complete bullshit artist story. The way he put that out there, you know, the fact that he was so adamant that he was home sleeping on his couch 3 times, and the fact that they chose to put that in the Oxygen documentary 3 times, just it's flabbergasting. I mean, come on. I mean, they were trying to. What good did that add to any of the documentary?
And I don't recall the interview with Dick McKean on that Oxygen series either. Why not interview them both?
They didn't interview Dick McKean.
No, I know. It
So,
wouldn't have fit their narrative, I don't believe.
Now, not interviewing Dick McKean would have been not a big deal if Dick McKean didn't show up on scene. But Dick McKean is another witness that you have that you could have spoken to that said, what did you see when you showed up? Which way did you come here? Did you see anyone? Okay? So, again, it's another case of this you know, this team, Art and Maggie, so-called trying to get to the bottom of everything. Well, you don't get to the bottom of everything unless you talk to everyone. And I think the prime example of all of that, okay, one other example is not talking to the other EMT, Tim Levitt. I mean, why didn't they talk to him? He was the one who saw the rag and pointed it out to Dick Guy. So he should have been talked to just to make sure Dick Guy's story is lining up.
Right.
Okay.
And you and I have spoken about some other witnesses who were there on the scene that no one's talked to, and that's the folks that came out on the fire truck. Not a single person was spoken with.
Yeah, and you've got 6 to 8 fire department members who are trained to come to a scene, do what they do, and be aware of situations and notice stuff. And none of these people were spoken to by Art and Maggie. And that, to me, is one of the biggest red flags of all. You know, and basically her words were, when we questioned that way back when it happened, was, well, why do we need to talk to, you know, them when we've spoken to the police and to the EMS? Well, Maggie, it's because there's 8 other peoples. That's 16 eyes. 16 different minds, 16 different people, or 16 different eyes looking at the same scene. And some people would notice some things, other people might not notice the other. And you talk to 8 different people, you could gather a lot of information. All right. Now, when I spoke to the fire department in 2004, the fall of 2004, I spoke to 2 of the firemen. I cannot remember their names right now, but they said when they pulled up on scene that the cruiser, and they said cruiser, the sedan, was parked at the entrance to Old Peters Road. And that's all I ever got out of them. I mean, you know, other than that, they said we saw the car, but we were told to get away from it by Cecil Smith. They said they walked around the area. They walked down, you know, the area of Bradley Hill Road, and in that area, and they were there for about an hour and something, hour and 10 minutes, I believe.
Yeah, and that's another thing you and I have spoken about. Fire was on scene for over an hour, yet EMS was only there for, I believe, was 6 or 8 minutes.
6 minutes.
You've got a potentially, in their mind at that time, if Cecil actually looked in the car and actually saw some liquor bottles, what have you, you've got a potentially intoxicated driver wandering out in the cold on her own, possibly injured from the spider web cracking on the front windshield, but yet you send the EMS away in only 6 minutes. Makes absolutely no sense to me. If anyone,
Right.
I would have sent the fire home after 6 minutes because we don't have a fire.
Right.
But EMS would have stayed on scene, I would have thought.
Yep.
And there were two
And,
EMS units and no other calls until I
right.
believe the suicide attempt on Limekiln Road.
So, and and if you look at this with, the, like you said, the time that the fire department and the EMS were called out was at 1942, so 7:42. Okay, so this is just before they're calling back. 7:43 when they're calling back Barbara Atwood. Okay, so where is the narrative with Atwood that, I mean, we know there is one. We saw, what Aaron Larkin, I believe, came up with. But again, that's very sketchy as well. It doesn't give you much of anything, especially anything that would indicate why now, after 13 minutes, you decide to call in the fire department in the EMS when you didn't decide to call them in at 7:27, which is protocol. I mean, that is automatic protocol. You've got word from Faith West, or from the dispatcher, unknown if any PI. So there's unknown if there's any leakage. I mean, automatically, protocol is to dispatch fire department and EMS.
And we verified that here recently with a member of fire and EMS that everyone should have been toned out or called out at the same time.
Yes. I spoke to, and she spoke to me in private message on Facebook as well as online. So I don't, I'm going to say her name, and her name is Abby Kennedy. She is married to who was then the fire department chief back then, Brad Kennedy. I've spoken to her in private message, and she told me that is protocol. She said it was back in 2004. It still is today. And she says, I do not know why they did not tone them out. Another thing that she has told me was that when they were, and this is very, very important here because we're not reading it in the log, but this is something that she told me, and I don't know why she would say this unless it's the truth. But she said when they were en route to the scene, they were by the Swiftwater Bridge, by the Little Eddy is what it's called, the river there. And she said that is when they overheard something on the radio, come over their radio, that said, be on the lookout for a tall blonde heading west towards the Stage Stop store, victim of a crash. So this is direct from a fire department member who's telling me that there's a tall blonde that's a victim of the crash. Where did the tall blonde come from? This is brand new information that she gave me about I think it's 3 or 4 weeks ago now. And it makes no sense. It doesn't correspond with anything that Butch Atwood says.
And Maura is not tall nor blonde. So
what's that?
I don't consider Maura tall nor blonde.
No, definitely not. Now, another thing that Abby put out there, and she did this right out on the Facebook pages, the open pages, was that she said that the accident was strange. She said she feels like the accident was staged. She said that there were no tire tracks up to the tree. The Saturn never hit that tree. And I, of course, said to her, well, I know that. I said, why do you suppose Cecil Smith would have said that? And she says, I have no idea. But these are things that are coming from a fire department member who, I mean, we've got Dick Guy, seeing the rag, saying that the scene looked strange, didn't hit a tree. It, possibly got the snowbank on the other side. And then we've got a fire department member telling us that it was staged. Um, I mean, where does this stop? How can you can't just toss those to the side, you know?
Yeah, and anyone who's ever been up there or even seen photos knows that on both sides of the road there is a ditch. And a car of Mara's size, if it were to have hit a tree, it had to have gone into that ditch. How could that car have gotten back on the roadway facing westbound? That car would have still been in the ditch.
Right.
So it
Right.
just nothing makes sense
If the ditch was
at the scene.
open, if the ditch was open, exactly. If the ditch was not open, say that there was too much snow and the snow was piled up, which we know that there was about almost 2 foot high snowbanks.
Right.
It means that the Saturn jumped up over that snowbank, rode up over the top of it, hit that tree, and bounced back out
Then
onto
magically
the road.
appear on the road.
The other way. And I'm not saying that that's not possible if indeed there was more damage to the vehicle. But you would have to be going
Right.
a high rate of speed, and I mean sail off that snowbank, hit that tree, and have it throw that car back out onto the road, because that's about, once it hit that, if it hit that tree, pine tree or whatever those pine trees that they're saying, which we know it didn't, that's another 10 feet, tossing it another 10, 11 feet back out onto the road.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's completely possible, but you would have to withstand a lot more damage and probably, I'm guessing, 40 to 50 mile an hour, and there's absolutely no way any car can do that corner at 40 to 50.
No, she never would have made it down around the corner. She would have, at that speed, she would have gone straight. And I think even Mr. Westman stated that before. He says that's not where cars usually go off. They usually go off right straight because they don't turn for the corner. He says they make it about 20 feet down into the corner and they go out through there. So, it's definitely just another odd thing of, she was into the straightaway when all this stuff occurs, where she supposedly spun around or went up and hit the tree and whatever. I mean, she was already into the straightaway part of that turn. She had come out of the corner, she was into the straightaway. So
yeah, to be going that direction and have damage to the driver's side of your vehicle, I just don't see how it could happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and two accident reconstructionists have proved the point. We really don't need to discuss it a lot, but I mean, when I first saw the vehicle, common sense said to me, I had seen the trees, and I went, I don't see any scars on the trees here. Then I saw the Saturn, and the Saturn, I'm looking at it, I'm going, there's no way that car went over a snowbank and hit a tree. I got the bottom bumper, which sticks out a foot past what was hit up top, was not damaged, broken, cracked, or nothing. It was loose, but it was not damaged like it should have been if what they say happened.
Right. And so I think it's an important thing to note that some folks out there who are listening who may have seen photos of Mara's car, there are many photos out there circulating that have been done years and years and years after her car was originally taken to the state police impound. Yep. And it's been moved several times, and a lot of that damage has occurred during the moving process.
Yep. That's correct. And then some of the damage, I believe, when the other reconstructionist people looked at that, they actually did take stuff like off so that they could see what was affected.
Right.
But as we know now, I mean, we know that Fred Murray started the car, and it was drivable. He drove it out of the Lavoie's garage on Friday the 13th. So, there's talk about how the fan,
went into the radiator. Yeah.
Into the fan and the radiator. That's not true.
No.
There was no leakage from the vehicle. The fan was not hitting the radiator or anything that was obstructing it. Again, the only thing that was damaged on the vehicle was that cracked part of the headlight directional, and the hood was pushed back.
Right.
That was the extent of that damage.
And the spider webbing on the windshield, and that's
Yeah,
still
well, yeah.
debatable as to when and how that happened.
That's very debatable.
Yeah.
Again, the airbags were deployed. I don't know the whole statistics and dynamics of a Saturn and what. I've never looked into what it takes to set the airbags off and where it has to be hit, because I've never believed the accident anyway. So I never dug into it. I was just like.
Yeah, for me personally, there's been talk on the various pages about potentially a wristwatch could have hit the windshield because of the force that the airbags do come out. Even then, I don't see it, because I personally have had friends whose mother actually had this happen, and it broke her arm because it threw her arm back toward the rear at such a pace that it,
Right. Mm-hmm.
for hers to have went forward and hit that, she would have been having to be hunched over the steering wheel for that to have been happened, in my opinion.
Right. And again, yeah, I mean, like you say, I mean, those airbags, they're made to come at you and push you back. If your hands are on the steering wheel, if it's going to blow your hands to the side. If say she had a wristwatch on and it broke out the side past driver's side window.
Yes, I could believe that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because your hands are on the steering wheel and it goes boom, and your arms go to the side. But for it to, for it to throw you up into the windshield and your arms up in the air to crack the windshield before the airbag stops you from getting that far, at that slow speed in that corner, I don't see that happening. We discussed it. We discussed a long, long time ago that we thought that, it's possible that the windshield could have been broken after the fact. And it's a matter of, if you're wearing a pair of gloves or whatever in the winter, in the cold, and you slap a windshield really hard or something, you can crack a windshield. And you could do that from the outside. Now, if you looked at the windshield in her car, you are going to notice that there's no, there was no blood or no hair. And it was a spider web crack, but there were no indications of like something actually hitting it. Like you said, like a wristwatch or someone's head.
Yeah, there was no indentation or a very small amount of crushed glass when you hit something with an object.
Yes, exactly.
I didn't see any of that.
Would have come out. Yeah, and it's nothing. So it's almost like, sometimes your window will just break. You'd be driving down the road, you hit a pothole, and you go, you get a 2-foot crack up through your windshield. And I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm just saying that that's how easy a windshield can break.
Yeah.
So.
And we have no evidence either way that windshield could have been broken while she was driving the car around Amherst. We
exactly.
have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Let's just say that, if there was some little altercation earlier with her in the Haverhill area, and somebody she drove into someone or someone backed into her at the store, and then she starts yelling at her and the guy gets out and whatever and, slams the windshield with his fist or something. Just something like that. And then that's when Maura's running because she's scared for her life,
Yep, everything like that's definitely a possibility.
Just throwing little things out there that, that could fit into this whole picture.
Right.
But the one that you got to add in that fits the most is the SUV responding to a call before it even happened and passing our witness twice.
Right. And I want to touch on one other thing about the SUV before we end our segment today. I know when Karen McNamara, witness A, has noted that the police called her back and said, after she had told them, hey, I saw this SUV, told her, no, you didn't see the SUV, even going to the point to tell her it was out of service.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it convenient that in the Oxygen Network series, that all of a sudden it is in service and Cecil was driving it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, they find her credible, okay, but what did they do to her? I mean, look at me. They intimidated me way back in the day when they told me to go away, okay? What did they do to Karen McNamara when she tried to tell them her story? Chuck West and another guy came to see her and told her that what she was accusing them of was very serious. And Karen's words were, "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just trying to tell you what I saw." So even after, even after they had classified her as a credible witness, they're going and trying to intimidate her. They were still trying to intimidate her at that point. And this was before the Oxygen documentary, but still, they were still trying to intimidate her. And
Right.
then, once that didn't work, then she is credible. They use her timeline. They say, oh yeah, the SUV was in service, but the only way that they can make that possible is if they throw Cecil in the driver's seat, throw Cecil under the bus.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we'll get into in a few future episodes is Cecil and the events that transpired on February the 20th and how they may be
Yeah.
related to this case. But John, let's
Yep.
wrap it up for today. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And one other thing I do want to put out there for those who are listening, one of our friends, Nancy, does put on a search every year for more and has the last couple of years. And just wanted to let everyone know that is coming up this year in June. And that will be Friday, June the 28th through Sunday, June the 30th. If you need to contact Nancy, if you're interested in going, please do so. You can reach her through her Facebook page, which is the 2019 June-Spring Search for Mara. So if you're interested, please let her know and she can give you more of the details. But John, is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I just want to let people know that, we've got a lot we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about how, when I just went to talk about the Grafton County Dispatch logs with the sheriff, how he brought a special investigator from the Special Investigation Unit from the New Hampshire State Police with him. They interrogated me for 3.5 hours and tried to intimidate me. I want to talk about how they were very interested in the information that I have gathered about Rick Forcier, his high school buddies, Jeff Strelson being connected. And one big thing that I want to talk about, and it's going to be Jeff Strelson and his connection to being the Attorney General, his connection to Rick Forcier, and the fact that Rick Forcier is one of the biggest suspects in this case. And if Jeff Strelson was his high school buddy and graduated with him, I think that Jeff Strelson needs to recuse himself from this case. And that's something that I'm going to dwell on quite heavily as we get going into this a little bit further and go through all of the stuff that does not add up and all the things that have been done and the way that the family's been treated. I think that it all makes a pretty picture, and it's going to have a nice little bow on it when it's done.
Sounds good. It sounds like we've got plenty of fuel for many future episodes. So we'll wrap it up there. John, thanks once again. And for all those folks listening to the teaser episode of the new True Crime Monkey podcast, we appreciate it. And we'll have you more coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
See ya.